This is Rob Seaman, and you are listening to Whole Earth Radio. Today is season 2, episode 13, and today I have a very special guest. Dr. Daniel Fabricant, PhD, is the CEO and president of the NPA, the Natural Products Association, which is the nation's largest and oldest trade organization representing the natural products industry. And before his tenure at the NPA, he was also the director of the Division of Dietary Supplement Programs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's, the FDA, where he directed agency policy, public affairs, and regulatory action regarding regulation of the dietary supplement industry. So from his experience there and also as a PhD in pharmacognosy from the University of Illinois at Chicago, where he has served as an adjunct professor in the Department of Medicinal Chemistry and Pharmacognosy since 2009. He has also published extensively and is internationally recognized for his regulatory and governmental public health expertise and natural products research. So with that impressive biography in front of us, Dan, thanks so much for being on the program.
Rob, thank you, and thanks for the nod to pharmacognosy. Always good to go back to our roots, pun intended. So, it's a good thing. The science of botanicals, it's important.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for all that you've done for the industry. I think we want to dive right in and just, in case anyone thinks, oh, this might be a boring conversation that doesn't pertain to me. I think we intend today to ramp it up a little bit and let everyone know, remind folks how the freedom to have access to dietary supplements really does affect them more than they may realize. Is that a fair?
Oh, it's very well put. In your and my conversations, the industry DNA is fighting. It's not being, it's not kind of, it's being an alternative and having to fight for that alternative, right? The industry was born out of folks who craved, and it's still in the DNA today that are looking for the ability to maintain their health and wellness on their own. They don't, whether for a myriad of reasons, they are entrusting themselves to say, hey, I'm going to guide my health and wellness. I'm going to make sure that my family stays healthy, and here's how I'm going to do it. And that's a pretty strong driver. And so I think, though, given our current state of affairs, current environment, a lot of drags at all of our attention, a lot of drags at, it's a busier day than people had 30 years ago when Deshay passed, right? We gotta be on our cell phone 7 hours a day now, Rob, right? We can't help it. Yeah, so there's a bit of a waning, which concerns me, and I appreciate you giving me the forum, because I know it concerns you as well. That hey, this isn't guaranteed that we're going to continue to have the access we have now unless we continue to make this a part of who we are.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to ask, there's so much, to cover here. And I think as we unpack this, I think the conversation is relevant to so many different stakeholders, to the small business that manufactures supplements, to the small business that sells supplements at the retail level, who have been the gatekeepers. They've been the folks who made sure that historically that companies that sold supplements were vetted, that we knew, they were part of helping to ensure that companies had good manufacturing practices. And you contrast that with the current marketplace that we kind of alluded to, where a brand can just pop up on Amazon, right? Or pop up in your Facebook feed, and you have no idea what they're actually selling you. Right. There's no context, and you're not even sure, never mind being a part of industry trade organizations or part of the discussion to regulate these things. They're just coming from out of left field.
Yeah.
And I think it makes those who have been part of a legacy of a very accountable industry, need to work to communicate that to the consumer. But there's this other piece of I don't know. How do you feel about the term Deshay 2.0? Is that
Oof.
accurate or
I,
not
I'm
really?
a big fan of Deshay 1.0. I'll be honest. I think it works and works well. I've been on both sides of it. There were people who, when I was at FDA, unfortunately, and it's a very very minor, it's folks came into the neighborhood looking to cause trouble, right? I think, you touch on something very important, Rob, is you talk about community, right? And you've long been a part of this community. Everyone knows, hey, you're in for a penny, in for a pound, you're invested. You want to see this, the all of our virtues continue, and you're invested in that. I think, unfortunately, what's happened because of the growth and the proliferation is there have been some that they don't necessarily want to be part of the community, but they want to be in a neighborhood, right? Because the neighborhood it's a nice it's a nice neighborhood. And so, to me, like, a lot of the Shea 2.0 talk, I think, stems from that. Is it's not very, I don't think people are taking a community approach to it and going, hey, wait a second, this worked. Like, the community itself, it's really strong. We have access to information. We have people like you out there, Rob, who are bringing people together. Like, that's important. And so, just to go, hey, you know what? Let's get 2.0 because let's make the buildings a little higher because we can. Let's not worry about the parks. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Let's take a look at what's actually working and what's not. Like, I mean, that's the part of being in it, being part of the community versus just being a neighbor. It's like, okay, we're going to plant trees. We're going to, people, we may never enjoy the shade of those trees, but we're going to plant them and we're going to make sure that they're being watered. And I think so much of it comes from that with the 2.0 is it's like, yeah, let's not do the maintenance. 30 years, I just had to put a new roof on my house, right? 30 years, right? And I haven't lived in the house for 30 years, but yeah, I bought it 8 years ago and I got the tail end of the deal. So but you got to do it, right? So I think it comes down to that is it's like we have to be willing to do the maintenance first. And if the maintenance says, hey, there are structural problems, cool, then let's look at 2.0. But I mean, I'd love to hear your take. I don't see, and again, I've been on both sides. I don't see the structural problems. I think if people put the effort into the laws, they work and work quite well. And you know, the fact that almost 80% of the country has confidence in our industry in what we have to offer. Wow. I mean, who else can say that?
Well, and I think there's two parts of that to me. When I hear from folks that there are proposed upgrades or improvements to Deshay, I guess the number one question is improvements for whom? Are we talking about
Right.
improvements for regulators and for the government or improvements for small business?
Right.
Will they be, a win-win? It seems like they seldom are. It's
Yeah.
usually kind of skewed towards government because they're the ones who do the regulating. And I
Yeah.
think, you can probably speak to that as well as anyone. But we
It's
need
interesting.
regulation. Clearly, we
Yeah.
want to keep out the bad actors, but I guess this sort of begs the question, what could we do? What could FDA and other organizations do enforcing what's already on the books rather than legislating new solutions?
Yeah, and I think you touched on it. And I think in some ways the government's perfected the crime because instead of saying, "Hey, we've tested these things that are on the book. Like, we put the pedal down, right? We put the gas in the car, we put the pedal down, and hey, we can only go but so far." I don't know that that's been done on a consistent basis. It's been done somewhat, and when it gets done, you're like, well, wait a second, that seems to support that it works. I think what we've seen by the government, unfortunately, and it's not just specific to FDA, but FDA is a pretty glaring culprit because last stat I saw was one out of every $4.50 in this country is spent on an FDA regulated good, food, drug, dietary supplement, what have you, that's a big part of our economy, right?
Yeah.
Um, so they're going, well, wait a second, that's a really tall task. Of course, they're going to ask for more, right? I mean, the Department of Defense asks for more every year, right? I mean, it's like the planet hasn't grown, but obviously new challenges come up, so on and so forth. But so I think that that's question one is what's, and you asked it pretty eloquently, is who's the benefactor here, right? If it's just so wait a second, we're going to add new features to the system of law, which, we go back to the roots of Deshay. It was to give consumers information in the marketplace and let them, really strike the balance between consumer access and harms. It's done that, right? I mean, very, very well, right? When I was at FDA, it was the only commodity on the food side that had adverse event reporting. And not that the presence of adverse event reports are indicative of a problem or anything else, but the number of adverse event reports since 2006, and the law going into effect that following year, 2007, they're they've tracked very, very low compared to the population that uses them. When we compare them with over-the-counter drugs, when we compare them with medical devices, when we compare them with vaccines, so on and so forth, run the list. And so the narrative that the side that has, I guess, been the critic of the industry, I'll put it kind of friendly at this point, has always been, well, we don't know what they're up to. They're unregulated. They're unsafe. And it's like the data points are to the contrary, right? With this far of a use pattern, if there was a problem, it's, I think we would have seen it by now, frankly speaking, this massive problem they talk about. You talk about that, yeah, there are specific, and unfortunately, and I'm not going to put a number on it or a type because some people like go, it's a huge problem. I don't think the numbers support that it's a huge problem. Are there people that are taking advantage of that? The internet is, somewhat the Wild West right now? Sure. I think that's where we see most of the challenges is, people pop up with a website like you talked about or pop up on Amazon and they go, hey, this is the greatest thing ever. Use it now, buy it now. And unfortunately, some folks still haven't adhered to the thing we were all taught when we were young. If it sounds too good to be true, probably is, and can avoid it that way. But with that aside, the notion that the FDA doesn't have the ability when they make these statements that are too good to be true, that are not truthful, misleading, or worse, harmful, the agency certainly has authority there. And if there are ingredients that frankly don't belong in a dietary supplement, they have authority there too. Not to mention, like you talked about, the GMPs. And God forbid there are harms on the back end. And this is the one that always gets me because and this isn't to brag or anything, but I don't think anybody thought when they gave the FDA on the food side mandatory recall, the first use of that letter to mandate a recall was done on a dietary supplement. It was done during 2013. I was at the agency. It was done on Ageline. You had non-hepatic liver function. You only had at the time we offered that letter to the company saying, hey, you're going to have to recall. Now, within 24 hours, they'd give an option to voluntarily recall. They did that because they saw the writing on the wall. But that was done with only 26 adverse event reports. Do you know how many adverse event reports it took to remove Vioxx? It was over 70,000 in a period of 6 years, right? So this notion that the tools aren't there and don't work if there is a problem are just, I don't know, Rob. I get fatigued by it. At the same time, I go, okay, well, let's get the word out. How do we get the
Yeah.
word out better? I think is challenge number one, and especially to the newer generation, like we were discussing, because they never had to fight for the industry.
Well, and just to put that together, like you did really well there, I mean, from your experience too, that was the ingredient was Ageline, you said?
Ageling, yeah, yeah, from the bale. Well, it's supposed to be Ageling from the bale tree, and it's got some hepatic. I mean, we can talk about structure activity relationship and get real
Right.
nerdy, but we will stay away from that. But yeah, that was what the agency cited was the culprit at the time to remove the product.
And then you're relating that to Vioxx, which is a
Yeah,
prescription drug,
yeah,
and your point is 26 adverse event reports to get perhaps a dangerous supplement pulled off the market. Takes 70,000 adverse events reports on a prescription drug to get that pulled off the market. So
right,
that's a statistic we ought to kind of wrap our heads around because the presumption that supplements are dangerous and that pharmaceuticals are safe
right.
is a bias that isn't necessarily supported by data.
Yeah, and we look over the past 10 years. We look at Purdue Pharma with OxyContin. We look at all these data points, and you go, and people love to, and especially the mainstream medical community, which, if I can be so bold, I think that's one of the challenges we still have as an industry is there's still that gap in engagement. There's still some doctors that, even though their patients, if you will, use supplements. I mean, 80% of the country uses supplements. Of course they do. Their approach to it, and their approach to it is because they only get, I think it was last I saw from medical, the Medical College Association of America, there where they break out the education, how many hours they get. I think it was something like 16 hours of nutrition education. And how much of that is supplements? That could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, depends on the school, right? Um, so yeah, they're kind of walking into an area where they're not familiar with it, and their advice is going to be in an 8-minute visit. Nope, don't do it. And it's like
Yeah.
all you're going to do
Err on the
is
side of caution.
right, right, and all you're going to do is you're for the person who's visiting you as a doctor is just going to go, I'm going to do it. I'm just not going to tell this doctor. I mean, right? So I think there's an engagement there. When you talk about finding solutions, I think that's certainly one where more and more we want to bring practicing physicians into the industry and show them, hey, look, here are the folks that are, they always go, well, who's doing it right and who's not? There's a lot more folks doing it right than aren't. I mean, that's at the end of the day, the plane landing safely. I know it doesn't sell many newspapers, but it's where we are.
Well, and I want to kind of talk about the mandatory product listings because
Sure.
that seems like the most pertinent threat or imminent threat or however you want to say that, right? Because I feel like, I mean, it was already on a bill, right? Headed towards the Congress. I mean, and they wanted to pass a clean bill, I think was how that went. So they took the NPL off, but
Yeah,
it,
we had a little something to do with that. So it was interesting. This came out from Senator Durbin, who, if folks don't know Senator Durbin, he's been a critic of the industry since he was in the state house in Illinois. He was actually, I believe, he had the first statewide ephedrine bill to ban ephedrine when he was in Springfield, Illinois. So he an early adopter of the fact that, hey, if I do something on supplements, that gets me the front page of the paper, right? Which at the end of the day, folks, you take a step back. No such thing as bad press if you're running for office. And so he's always gotten a lot of press on this issue, for better or worse. Yeah, this came from him. He got to Mike Braun, who's going back to be the governor, or going to be the governor of Indiana, running for the governor. He was a senator. Got to Braun, which is a little odd because Braun actually had a history in the medical device industry and kind of locked horns with the FDA on numerous occasions. So it was a little weird that he's just going to throw in and go, hey, yeah, let's give FDA this new authority. And so to your narrative, 100% right. It got through the Help Committee, the Senate committee that has oversight on FDA. It got through that on a narrow vote, and people, that was a little further than we wanted it to go. We heard about the bill, we fought the bill, we fought. They snuck it in because there was a must pass. It was on what is known as the User Fee Authorization Acts for pharmaceuticals, and you go, wait a second, why is there a dietary supplement bill on the user fee? Right. So I mean, this was as dirty a political tactic as you can prove, and the fact that some people were backing this and going, yeah, that's fine. It's like you have never seen prior any of the user fee authorization on pharmaceuticals have anything to do with our industry or anything to do with foods for that matter. So this was a hand on the scale, right? And Senator Durbin's very powerful, second or third most powerful Democrat in the Senate, depending on who you ask and what day, because he's got a lot of juice and done very well for himself. So thumb on the scale. And so they had to negotiate this bill, though, to your point, and keep it clean, keep some of these other riders off. And so and thankfully, you helped get the word out to a lot of folks, a lot of grassroots, and not just our organization, folks like Alliance for Natural Health we work with. A lot of folks like that, like-minded, got a lot of grassroots mail up there. And so that was kind of step one, was keep the pressure on there so offices heard, and they heard from the constituents. Their constituents were like, hey, I'm not doing this. This is why does FDA need this? I'm not hearing a clear benefit. There's already a database at NIH that has 180,000 labels. FDA can't look on there to see what, this, and it all comes from this notion, and FDA likes to say it publicly, well, we don't know what's out there. We can't see into the industry. Rob, you and I can spend 3 seconds. I can get, my daughter's 12. She's pretty good at doing Google searches. There's no product she can't find. So,
right.
and I'm pretty sure the FDA, at least when I was there, they had access to Al Gore's internets and the Google machine and all that fun stuff. So that aside, we were able to get to a lot of our friends in the House and block this and shut it down and keep the bill clean. But they're going to try again because they really, they both they get additional money for this. There's an appropriations for this, which government always, hey, your tax dollars. Why they want more of them? That's fine, and sometimes they're for good use. I'm not going to say it's always, but for this particular issue, all it does is create a fishing expedition for trial bar and plaintiff's bar. You remember during all the problems with infant formula, and the commissioner of FDA said they lost documents in the mailroom. You remember that? Which was a
Yeah.
terrible answer, especially for these poor, these poor families that lost their child and everything.
That's terrible.
So if someone sends in their product registration, which is what it is, their pre-market product registration, and the desk clerk at FDA who's working on NPL takes a vacation and it gets lost in the mail, and then your product doesn't show up on that NPL, and then Amazon won't put you on there, so you can't get insurance. Credit card processors won't touch you, to your point. Um, and then states like California, where they have very strict Consumer Protection Act, go, wait a second, I saw your product in X retailer, but you're not on the FDA list, so you're committing fraud. And I saw there were 2,000 bottles, so every count I'm going to sue you for. You go, whoa, like this is live fire, right? This isn't a training exercise any longer. And so those are the reasons why we've stood against it, remain to stand against it. We really think that if FDA wants the labels that bad, here's the other thing. When I was at FDA, we led the inspections, the GMP inspections. If I go into your facility, Rob, I have a right to make a photocopy of every one of your labels, or I can ask you to make it for me. And people generally don't refuse FDA and the inspectors when they do that. So, right. Why isn't FDA doing that now, collecting those labels and doing what they can with them internally? So it's this control mechanism more than it is they really want the labels. It's they want you to submit. They want to use that submission to say thumbs up, thumbs down. As you can imagine, that thumbs down, credit card processors, e-tailers, retailers say, hey, you're not on the list, right? It's like the nightclub, the Saturday Night Live skit with the Will Ferrell and Chris Kattan, the brothers always trying to get into the club.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
but so that's a basic question about an
Yeah.
NPL
Yeah.
that no one, well, I wouldn't say no one, but I mean, NPA has been asking, but some folks are asking this, does does mandatory pre-listing mean pre-approval? Does a mandatory listing mean pre-approval to get on the list? Like
Yeah.
your comparison to the guest list. I mean, it's like, nope, you're not on the list. You
Right.
can't be sold anywhere. That's power that government doesn't have right now. So it
And shouldn't, frankly.
wouldn't a product listing eventually equate to pre-approval no matter what we do?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that can be used for good or bad. I mean, then we had some conversations with some folks who said, no, 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 FDA will put everything on the list. And it's like, whoa, 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 wait a second. That's not necessarily good either, because there are going to be, then, okay, unfortunately, the folks who are selling gas station Viagra and calling it a supplement when, that's the other thing that's laughable in all this too, is those are areas where FDA, it's like, look, as the trade, I don't have any members selling Viagra into gas stations. They're generally not, sorry, that's just not,
They don't join
right,
trade
right.
organizations.
The Counterfeit Products Association, I've not run across them yet in DC, but maybe someday,
One day.
So I think with that is the other side, right? Like just that construct, it's very binary, right? It's either you put everything on that list or FDA screens for that list. And neither one of those outcomes is particularly, they've downsides to both and strong downsides. And I think that that's really the issue. Going full circle back to your point is, who does it benefit? If it's just to make FDA's job easier, okay, I can see there's some value there, but FDA is going to make their own job easier by taking one of those folks out there who are selling gas station Viagra or something like that and hitting them hard. I mean, for better or worse, it's law enforcement, right? It's nerdy law enforcement, but it's law enforcement, right? You've got to set up a deterrent, right? If someone's going to adulterate the food supply or misbrand a food and use illegal claims, you've got to make an example out of them to where other people go, yeah, that's not going to run on that system. So ultimately, I think it comes down to that. But this MPL thing, for the reasons we talked about, and it'll come back, Rob. And we need, and I appreciate your support for guiding people. Say, hey, people, you got to fight. You don't be quiet on this one. Like you've got to speak up because the people may go, well, MPL, that sounds great. And everyone who was for it was out there going, well, your industry's not transparent. It's like, I remember, I'm kind of a not the best history buff, but somewhat of a history buff. It's ironic that anytime someone's like, well, you're not being transparent, those are always the people not being transparent, right? It's a,
Right.
when you point the arrow, Brutus was telling Caesar he wasn't transparent. We know how that ended.
Uh,
Um,
thou doth protest too much or something like that, right?
yeah. So, I think, and I think that's the challenge is it's like, what do they really, if they really want the labels, Rob, they can get them now. They can get them on inspection now. So it's clearly not about the labels. It's really more about that element of either they're going to use it to say you're on the list or not on the list. And that's scary because if we look at that, um, I know you've been following what we did on NAC. I don't know how deep you want me to go into that, but NAC and amino acids sold since the early 90s. Before Deshay, FDA a few years ago said, nope, can't be a supplement. We sued them, got it back. They're in the process of actually writing a regulation, first time ever, to say something that they said was a drug can now be a supplement. So that's a piece of good news, and kudos to our board for letting us, really us and our attorneys fight that